airliners are a part of everyday life. They're as commonplace as buses and cars. But 70 years ago, flying was a very different affair, when noisy and unreliable aircraft made air travel a pretty uncomfortable experience. Then, one aircraft came along that changed everything. Sleek, fast and reliable, it was the Douglas DC3. The DC3, the DC stands for Douglas Commercial, was a revolution in aircraft design. Whereas previous airliners had been built of wood and of canvas, the DC3 was almost entirely constructed of metal. And with its two huge Wright Cyclone engines, it could fly at a previously unheard of top speed of almost 196 miles an hour. And with its 28 seats, it could carry almost twice as many passengers as its competitors. The DC3 was extremely well designed. By making maximum use of the new art of streamlining, the engineers at Douglas had created an aircraft that cut through the air. The DC3 not only looked very modern, it symbolised the future of air travel. The DC3 entered service with American Airlines in 1936. It first flew from Chicago to New York, and it quickly became a favourite with the passengers who loved what was then an incredibly spacious and quiet cabin. It had new luxuries, like a galley and a toilet. It even had rubber dampers on each seat to reduce vibration. Amazing attention to detail. The outbreak of World War II saw the DC3 in uniform. It was produced in huge numbers for the US Army Air Force, where it was known as the C-47, or, more affectionately, the Goonie Bird. It was also flown by the RAF and Commonwealth Air Forces, who named it the Dakota. But for the thousands of men who flew it into battle, it was always known as the DAC. The DAC's versatility saw it operate in almost every theatre of the war, whether it was hauling supplies, towing gliders, dropping troops, or evacuating the wounded. The DC-3 did it all with ease. In fact, General Eisenhower claimed that alongside the Jeep and the bazooka, the DC-3 was one of the machines that won the war. So perhaps it's not surprising that by the time the last DC-3 rolled off the production line in 1946, a staggering 10,926 had been built. With the war over, airlines were looking for cheap, reliable aircraft with which to resume passenger flight. And the obvious answer was all of those war surplus Dakotas. And it soon became the aircraft of choice for airlines around the world. How important was the Dakota itself in those post-war years for starting up all of the new airlines?
I think it was very important. I can recall doing short charters to what was known in those days as the Bulbville flights to Rotterdam. And you would see as many as 35, 40 aeroplanes coming from all parts of the UK. And you could say probably 30 to 40% of those would be Dakotas.
And when you're on these early tourist flights, early charter flights, how important was the DC-3 in those times?
Well, I think at that time, because it was a reasonable cost aeroplane to operate, I think it was very important. I mean, companies were starting up, they had very little money, and so it was the perfect aeroplane. And of course it had a good range for what it was designed to do. And from that point of view, I think it was first class.
What were the little foibles? What did you have to look out for as a pilot?
What it used to do, of course, in very heavy rain, the windscreens would leak, and we used to have to put pinafores on to keep our knees dry. But overall, no major problems. One had to be careful in airframe icing. You had to be very careful when these anti-icing systems are switched on. If you got it too early, you could, create a lot of trouble. One, obviously, tried to keep out of Met conditions where you were going to run into icing, but of course most of the time you couldn't avoid it. And one of the notorious areas, of course, was going down to the south of France through the Rhone Valley. And one could have some exciting things happen down there. But superb aeroplane, particularly for the start of the inclusive tour business back in the 50s and 60s.
In the UK, airlines like Dan Air, BKS and Morton were eager to exploit the growing demand for foreign holidays. And so once again, the Dakota found itself leading a new era in air travel as it flew holidaymakers on package tours around Europe. A whole new industry was emerging. Suddenly, places that had once simply been names on a map were affordable and within reach. The package holiday, with its alluring combination of sun and exotic destinations, had arrived. And of course, it was a time of people going on the first package holidays, wasn't it? The first time people had ever flown. What were the first destinations?
Oh, places like Jersey, we went down to Spain, and we used to charter, of course, to places like Paris.
And destinations like Paris must have been really exotic then, I suppose.
They were fantastic. I mean, people had just never really done it. Paris was 2 or 3 days, wasn't it, by train or a coach or whatever. And to be able to go to Paris for a day really was tremendous. Little old ladies, people who'd never ever thought to fly until this appeared. People who worked in the mills in Bradford who not aspired to do things like flying. Suddenly it was all there and it was available. And it just was such an absolute amazement that they used to get on the aircraft and you could see them looking around and just the sheer thrill of it was wonderful.
And presumably they'd turn up in their finery for the flight, would they?
Always, always. Even ladies with hats, but the men's had the suits. And if they went to Spain or, you know, any of the even hot destinations, they were always in the shirts and the cavalry twirls and the little hats. Yes, they did.
So almost 40 years on, as we look at the DC3, what are your memories of it? Why do you like it so much?
Reminds me of freedom, of youth. It flew so slow, the sunsets. You could watch. We didn't have enough passengers to stop us being able to do that. So you had the privilege to sit and stare, to watch the sunrise or sunset, wherever you were. And it just had such a lovely feeling of freedom. Absolute freedom.
The DC3 has helped to create many memorable aviation landmarks. But for one person, it has a special significance. In 1965, Yvonne Pope-Sinters became the UK's first female airline pilot. And she achieved this notable distinction flying a DC3. 34 years later, she's reunited with one of the DACs she flew in commercial service. When did you last see it?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think I've seen it since about 69.
Oh my God.
Yes, it's wonderful to see it again.
It must be quite a pleasure, is it?
Oh, it is. Yes. It's still a lovely aeroplane. It really is.
Let's go and have a look inside. Yvonne, it's been many, many years since you've been in the cockpit of the DC3. What's it like sitting back at the controls there?
It's great. It feels like home again. It's 33 years.
Is it really?
I stopped flying them in 1970.
And what was your first experience on a Dakota? I think you were 17 or something.
Yes, I was a passenger.
And when you were that passenger aged 17, did you ever imagine that you'd one day be a captain of the aircraft?
I hoped so.
Really?
Yes, I did. In fact, I'd had my first flight on a DC4 down from Stockholm to Gothenburg, and I desperately wanted to go up in flight, but they wouldn't let me. So I asked, could I have a look in the cockpit when we landed, which they did. And then, when we actually landed in London, after the flight in the DC3, they did let me sit in the cockpit, and I looked at the instruments, and I thought, I think I'm going to be able to manage this.
And you must have been one of the first females in commercial aviation, were you?
After the war, yes. Yes, unfortunately, the women pilots who'd done such a magnificent job during the war found there were very few jobs going, as did the men. And so there were only 1 or 2 who managed to do some commercial flying.
And so what was it like being at the forefront of this arm of commercial aviation?
Well, it was just a job, which I wanted to do very badly and thoroughly enjoyed.
And what was it like as an aircraft to fly? Was it easy? Was it difficult?
No, it was not difficult at all. It was really quite easy. The only problem I never had with it was on the ground in a strong crosswind.
Why was that?
Because it would swing badly due to the high rudder, and you'd have to use an awful lot of force on the rudder pedal. We had all 4 feet on the same side once.
How did people react when they saw a female pilot, the passengers getting on board?
At first they were a little bit not quite sure, but afterwards they were really quite glad to have a woman pilot. In fact, one passenger came up to me and said, "Oh, I am glad we had you today."
Why were they so pleased to see a lady flying?
Well, maybe they thought she understood a bit more, and when I myself was a captain, I always used to try to explain things. If we were going to have a difficult approach, I'd say, "Well, I'm afraid the weather isn't too good. We'll just go down and have a look, and if we don't see the lights, we'll just have to put the power on and climb up again. So don't be alarmed if you hear the power going on."
Is it an aircraft that you've got fond memories of?
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed. She's the queen of the skies.
It's incredible to think that many DC-3s are still in operation nearly 70 years after that first American Airlines flight. And the largest operator in Europe is based here at Coventry Airport. So it's where I've come to take my flight on this legend of aviation. Before the flight, I meet one of Air Atlantic's senior captains who, inspired by Yvonne Pope-Sinter's achievement, chose the Dakota as the plane she wanted to fly. Cap, how did you start flying on the DC-3?
I applied for a job with the company, hoping that maybe one day they'd let me loose on this one, and fortunately they just got a big contract for the Dakota, so they were looking for people to train on the deck straight away, so I came straight onto it.
Why the DC-3? What attracted you to it?
The history of the aeroplane. It's been the backbone of every major airline the world over, not just the UK. This is the foundation stone of the industry, really. It's a classic aeroplane. It's one a pilot can make a difference to. The controls are all very directly connected. It's your original fly-by-wire. There's a wire attached to each end. So what you ask for is what you get. It's a very honest aeroplane. It'll do anything you ask of it, including getting yourself into mischief and then giving you the ability to get out of mischief. So, no, it's a very honest aeroplane.
It's also an old aircraft, but you're still using it on operations. Why is it important to you guys here?
Because it's still the most capable. You look at a modern equivalent and they've designed it around the specification of a DC-3. Can we carry 36 passengers or 3.5 tonne? The freight door, with this being a C-47, is huge for the size of aeroplane. And again, a modern aircraft would be pressurised, and putting a door that size on creates problems of its own. The deck just gets around it by not being pressurised.
And why do you like flying it?
Because of the character. It's got soul. It's an aeroplane that's been places, done things, and it's a delight to fly.
Hearing the aircrew talk about the DC-3, it's easy to see why they all fell in love with it. And in part 2, I'll have the chance to experience the charm of this wonderful old aircraft when I go flying in the Dakota.